A bright sun climbed over the rooftops as Michael stepped off the tour bus, his heart pounding with excitement. He had flown halfway around the world to see the famous royal palace in London. The air smelled of fresh rain and roasting street food from nearby stalls. A light breeze carried the chatter of families, couples, and school groups, all eager for a glimpse of history. Michael tightened the strap of his camera bag. He had chased many travel stories before. Ancient temples in Japan, colorful markets in Morocco, snow-capped mountains in Canada. But today felt different. Today was April 1st, April Fool's Day, and he carried in his mind a daring idea. He planned a harmless joke on one of the palace guards, who stood as still as statues. He pictured the reaction already: laughter, surprised faces. Maybe a viral video that would make his friends back home roar with delight. He walked along the wide, cobblestone path leading to the palace gates. Low barriers. Tour guides waved flags as they guided new arrivals through the history of kings and queens, secret passages, and royal treasures. Michael paused as he approached the first guard. The soldier stood in a bright red coat and tall bearskin hat, expressionless and motionless. Tourists snapped photos of the guard, careful to keep their distance. The air around the sentry seemed charged with ceremony and respect. Michael crouched down to check his camera settings. He tested a few shots, framing the guard from several angles. In the viewfinder, the soldier looked like a living painting, perfect posture, polished boots, eyes straight ahead. Michael's fingers itched to capture the moment in a more memorable way. He imagined tapping the guard's shoulder and capturing the sudden shock on camera. Everyone would laugh. It would be a moment to remember. He rose and leaned against a nearby lamppost, watching the guard's slow breath. The soldier's chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm. Not a single muscle twitched. Michael felt a surge of respect at the guard's discipline. Yet the idea of a little prank still glowed. In his mind, it had to be harmless, right? A quick tap, a word of April Fool's, and then a bow before walking away. No harm done. Only good fun. He walked forward, weaving through the crowd. Children clung to their parents' hands, pointing at the guards with wide eyes. A small dog on a leash barked at its own reflection in a polished boot. Michael paused behind a family of 3, waiting for the perfect moment. His heart felt light, as if dancing to an invisible tune. He checked his watch. It was almost noon, plenty of time before the next guard change ceremony. Nearby, a street musician tuned his guitar and began to play a gentle melody. The notes echoed off the palace walls, softening the formal air. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. He thought of his family back home, hearing about this trip with envy. They would not believe he actually got so close to a royal guard. He grinned, imagining the text he would send. "Guess what I did today, April Fools?" Stepping forward, Michael counted his steps. 7, 8, 9. In his mind, he choreographed the exact moment of contact. He would tap lightly on the guard's shoulder, right below the bearskin hat. Soldier would spin around, eyes wide, looking for an invisible prankster. Laughter would ripple through the crowd. Michael would appear, raise a hand, grin, and say April Fools. The crowd would cheer, children would giggle, even the guard might crack a smile. As he neared the barrier, he felt a slight hesitation. The guard looked more imposing the closer he came. The red coat contrasted sharply with the white stone walls. The bearskin hat seemed to add another foot of height. The soldier's face was calm, almost stern. Michael reminded himself, it was just a joke. He would be polite, brief, and respectful. No one would be angry. He inched forward, slipping between 2 larger tourists who stepped aside. Now he stood just a few feet from the guard. His hand hovered above the guard's shoulder. Michael's pulse raced. He glanced around. Everyone else was merely watching, frozen in their own little worlds. Some snapped photos, others whispered together. No one seemed to notice his plan. A sudden shout rose from the other side of the plaza. A street performer had grabbed everyone's attention. Michael saw a juggler toss flaming torches into the air. The crowd ooh-ooked and ought. In that instant, Michael's hand paused. He realized how easily true danger could be confused with playful fun. If the juggler dropped a torch, someone could be hurt. If he tapped the guard too hard, he might break. Protocol, or worse, anger an officer. He looked again at the guard. The soldier's gaze remained fixed ahead. Michael swallowed. Was it worth it? He had come so far, dreamt of this moment, yet now fairness and respect felt heavier than any prank. He imagined the story after. Tourist joke backfires. Headlines might read that he disrespected tradition, saw the guard not as a prop in a joke, but as a person fulfilling a duty. Still, Michael's sense of adventure nudged him forward. He lifted his hand and paused again. The guard's boots were scuffed but polished. The red coat had small brass buttons that caught the sun. Michael felt he could study those buttons for hours. The soldier's position was a living history lesson. He weighed the laughter he might earn against the respect he might lose. A gentle tap on Michael's shoulder made him jump. He turned and saw an elderly woman smiling. She pointed to his sandwich bag. "Your lunch," she said, offering him his forgotten snack. Michael laughed and thanked her. The simple kindness startled him more than his prank ever would. He accepted the sandwich, nodded politely, and turned back toward the guard, but this time with softer eyes. Michael realized that a memory of genuine kindness, of respect and understanding would last longer than any viral video. He lowered his hand. He raised his camera instead, framing a photograph of the guard standing strong against the palace wall. Click. The camera captured a moment of history without comedy. But with honor, he watched the guard for a while longer, then stepped back. He strolled away from the barrier, ducked beneath the metal bar, and rejoined the crowd. He found a bench in a quieter corner of the plaza and sat down to open his sandwich. He savored each bite, thinking not of jokes, but of the thousands of people who had stood in the same place centuries ago. He thought of the weight of tradition and the power of simple respect, filling his notebook. Michael jotted down a new idea for his friends. April Fools can wait. Today, I learned about honor. He sketched the guard's silhouette in the margin, bearskin hat and all. A sense of calm settled over him. The plaza's energy shifted as the guard change ceremony approached. Trumpets sounded in the distance. Guards marched toward the gate in perfect unison. Tourists lined the fences, voices hushed in anticipation. Michael stood and joined the crowd at the barrier once more, but this time as a silent observer, not a prankster. He waited with others to watch the ancient ritual of soldiers marching in crisp red and black uniforms. When the ceremony began, he raised his camera high, not to capture a laugh, but to record a moment of true pageantry and history. As he pressed the shutter, Michael felt a new kind of thrill, the thrill of witnessing something far greater than a simple prank. He packed away his camera, rose with the crowd, and walked toward the palace gates, curious to see what other lessons this place might hold. Michael moved forward with careful steps, his hands steady on the camera strap. He felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The moment had come. He would tap the guard on the shoulder, capture the reaction, and share a laugh with everyone around. He took a deep breath and leaned in. Then, with a swift motion, he reached out and touched the guard's shoulder lightly. Instantly, every head turned. The guard whirled around in one smooth move, eyes searching for the prankster. Michael held his breath. The guard's face was calm but alert. He looked directly at Michael, as if he knew who had touched him before the contact even happened. The crowd gasped. A hush fell over the plaza. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He stepped forward with his hands raised in a playful gesture. "April Fools," he cried. A big grin plastered across his face. Expected laughter, applause, maybe even a thumbs up from the guard. Instead, the silence grew deeper. No one moved. No one smiled. All at once, a small ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Some people looked at the guard, then at Michael, and back again, as if they could not decide whether to laugh or be upset. The guard remained perfectly still, feet shouldered width apart, boots planted firmly on the stone. He said nothing. Did not crack a smile or raise an eyebrow. He simply looked at Michael with serious eyes. Michael's grin faltered. He realized the moment was not going as planned. The guard's unwavering stare made him feel small and foolish. He glanced around hoping someone would laugh or at least shrugged. But the crowd held its breath. Parents pulled their children back behind the barrier. Tourists lowered their cameras. The street performer nearby stopped playing, as if sensing something was wrong. Michael swallowed hard. The guard's silence felt heavy, almost stern. He gave a quick, nervous laugh. "Just a joke," he said, trying to break the tension. But his voice sounded thin and awkward. He backed up a step, raising both hands in a surrendering gesture. He expected the guard to nod or at least relax a little, but the guard did not move. His eyes remained straight ahead, as if Michael had not spoken. Then Michael saw a flash of motion at the edge of his vision. A palace officer in a dark suit and polished shoes hurried toward him. Behind that officer, 2 security guards in navy uniforms appeared, walking in quick, measured steps. They reached Michael and formed a small circle around him. One officer spoke into his radio, his voice low but firm. Michael's heart sank. The prank had backfired badly. He looked at the guard again. The soldier was still at attention, motionless, except for his steady breathing. Michael felt a wave of shame. His cheeks burned red. He had wanted to create a fun memory, but now he felt he had broken an unspoken rule. He thought of all the stories he'd heard about strict palace protocol. He had dismissed those tales as exaggerations. Now he knew they were real. The officer in the suit cleared his throat and addressed Michael. "Sir," he said, his tone polite but serious, "you must not touch the guards. They are on duty and must remain focused."
Nice.
Michael searched for a way to explain. He raised his hands and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm. It was just a joke for April Fool's Day." The officer nodded, but did not smile. He checked Michael's passport, glanced at the guard, then handed the passport back. Michael looked at the passport in his hand, feeling its weight. He had traveled far and spent a lot of money to be in this place. Now the whole trip seemed in jeopardy. He scanned the faces around him. Onlookers watched quietly, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with disapproval. A few children stared curiously, unsure what was happening. The palace officer spoke again. "I will issue you a warning today. But if you attempt such actions again, you may face more serious consequences." Michael nodded quickly. "Officer, I understand," he said, his voice sincere. He felt a knot in his stomach. He had come to honor the place, not to disrespect it. He lowered his head in apology. Behind the officer, the guard shifted his weight slightly, the first sign of movement since Michael's prank. He took a single step back, as if to show the court was no longer needed. Then he resumed his position, chest rising and falling in that steady, disciplined rhythm. Michael noticed how the light caught on the brass buttons of the guard's coat. The uniform looked less like a costume now, and more like a symbol of duty. Michael cleared his throat. "I'm very sorry for disturbing you, sir," he said to the guard, keeping his voice low and respectful. The guard did not respond in words. He simply looked at Michael for a moment and then turned his head back, resuming his forward gaze. In that silence, Michael felt a lesson sink in. Respect often spoke louder than words. The officer motioned for Michael to step away from the guard. "You may return to the public area," he said. Michael nodded and backed toward the crowd. He kept his eyes on the ground, feeling the rough stone under his shoes. When he reached the barrier, he hesitated. He wanted to look back at the guard one more time, but he also felt ashamed. He finally glanced up. The guard was still there, unmoving like a statue. Michael raised a small hand in a silent gesture of apology and respect. He turned and walked away, weaving through the crowd with his head down. Every step felt heavy. He reached a bench in the shade and sat down. His camera bag felt like a stone on his shoulder. He removed his sunglasses and wiped his forehead. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. He felt dizzy for a moment, as if the bright sun had lost its warmth. Michael sat on the bench, trying to calm his racing heart. He looked around at the palace plaza from a distance. The marble pillars glowed in the sunlight. The other guards stood unmoved, watching the passers-by. Tourists whispered to each other, pointing at the scene that had just unfolded. Some shook their heads, some shrugged. Life in the plaza continued, but Michael's mood had shifted.
Nice.
Out his travel journal from his pocket and opened it to a blank page. He picked up a pen and wrote a few lines. Tried an April Fool's joke on a royal guard. It went wrong. Felt shame. Learned to respect tradition. He underlined each phrase. Writing helped him sort his thoughts. Sketched a small picture of the guard's silhouette in the corner, tall bearskin hat and all. As he wrote, Michael noticed an elderly couple walk by. They paused near him and smiled kindly. The woman said, "Are you all right?" Michael looked up and managed a small smile. "I'm fine," he said, "just a little embarrassed." The man nodded. "We've all made mistakes," he said gently. "What matters is that we learn from them." Michael felt a warm glow at their words. The couple continued on, hand in hand, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. He closed his journal and took a deep breath. The palace officer's warning echoed in his mind. He knew he should leave the prank behind. The rest of his visit did not need to revolve around a joke. There was so much history to absorb, so much beauty to see. He could still enjoy the day, but with a new outlook. Michael stood and brushed dust from his jeans. He slung his camera bag over his shoulder again. He looked back at the palace gates. From a respectful distance, in his mind he replayed the prank, the guard's gaze, the officer's warning. He realized he had wanted a fun story to share. But now he had a more meaningful story. The story of respect and cultural understanding. Determined to make the most of his trip, Michael walked toward the nearby gardens behind the palace. He followed a wide gravel path lined with neat hedges and colorful flower beds. Birdsong mingled with the gentle hum of visitors exploring the grounds. Children chased butterflies, and painters set up easels to capture the view. Michael paused at a fountain and filled a small bottle of water. He drank slowly, savoring the cool liquid. The tension drained from his shoulders. He thought of his family back home. He would tell them about this day, but he would tell them about the lesson. More than the laugh, he would share the moment he tried a prank and learned to appreciate tradition and dignity. With a renewed spirit, Michael raised his camera and began to photograph the garden. He framed the flowers, the sky, the distant palace tower. He found beauty in every corner. Clicked away, focusing on scenes of peace rather than pranks. The warm sun and gentle breeze no longer felt harsh. They felt welcoming, guiding him to new experiences. As he walked deeper into the garden, Michael carried with him a quiet respect for the palace guards he had once seen as mere photo subjects. Now he saw them as symbols of history and culture. His prank had gone wrong, but the day was far from ruined. In fact, it had become one of his most memorable adventures, one that would change how he traveled and how he saw the world. Michael followed the narrow corridor behind the palace gates, each step echoing softly on polished stone floors. He felt a flutter in his chest as two uniformed officers flanked him. The corridor led to a small room with a single wooden table and two straight-backed chairs. A weak strip of sunlight fell through a high window, painting a pale line on the floor. Michael's camera bag felt heavy at his side, his heart hammered with a mix of regret and curiosity. He had never been in a situation like this before. He wondered what would happen next. One officer motioned for Michael to sit. The other remained standing, arms crossed. The seated guard from earlier stood behind a low partition, still wearing his red coat and bearskin hat. Michael swallowed and slid into the chair. Across the table, a young lieutenant in a crisp uniform laid out a form and a pen. His face was calm but firm. Michael looked at the lieutenant's polished boots and the neat creases in his trousers. He cleared his throat and braced himself. The lieutenant began in a polite voice. "Sir, we understand you meant no harm, but palace protocol forbids touching guards. They stand at attention to protect history and tradition." Michael nodded, his mind racing. He tried to find the right words. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I was foolish. I thought it would be a harmless joke. I did not mean to offend." The lieutenant's eyes flicked up, studying Michael's face. He leaned back and folded his hands on the table. After a moment, the lieutenant spoke again. "We will record your apology and issue a warning. You may not be banned from the palace. However, you must listen to a brief explanation of our duties and traditions." Michael's shoulders relaxed a little. He welcomed any chance to learn more. "Yes, sir," he replied. "I want to understand." The lieutenant gave a curt nod and stood. He signaled the other officer, who unlocked a door behind the partition. Beyond the door lay a small briefing room. A projector screen hung on one wall, and a few chairs faced it. Michael and the seated guard moved inside. The officers left them there for a moment. Michael felt awkward sitting alone with the guard. He offered a small, respectful nod. The guard returned the gesture, his face unreadable. Michael thought he saw the guard's eyes soften ever so slightly. He found the courage to speak. "Thank you for letting me learn. I respect your service." The guard inclined his head but remained silent. The lieutenant returned with a remote and clicked it. A slide appeared on the screen, showing an old black and white photograph of soldiers marching in front of the palace. The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the projector. The lieutenant spoke, his voice echoing slightly. He explained that guards had stood at that post for hundreds of years, watching over the palace and its people. They served as living symbols of continuity and stability. Michael watched the images of past soldiers, some in tall bearskin hats, others in more humble uniforms. He saw faces filled with pride and duty. The lieutenant pointed to a photograph of a young guard from World War II who had maintained his post during an air raid. Michael's eyes widened at the thought of a soldier standing firm under fire. He realized that his prank, though small, touched on a deep tradition of sacrifice and respect. Then the lieutenant showed images of modern training. He described the long hours guards spent learning to stand perfectly still, to control their breathing, to maintain focus amid noise and motion. Michael thought back to the plaza, where children shrieked and cameras clicked, yet the guards never flinched. He imagined the years of practice behind those frozen expressions. His prank, he now understood, might have been seen as a test of their discipline. The guard shifted his weight and tapped the partition. He stepped forward and removed his bearskin hat, revealing close-cropped hair and a kind face. He spoke a single word to Michael: respect. Michael felt a lump in his throat. The guard's calm voice held more power than any reprimand. Michael bowed his head and whispered, "I respect you and your duty." The guard nodded and replaced his hat, then stepped back to resume his post behind the partition. The lieutenant clicked the remote again, showing photographs of palace ceremonies changing of the guard. State visits, official processions. Guards marched in crisp lines as trumpets sounded. Michael recalled how he had watched the changing ceremony from a distance, marveling at the precision. The lieutenant explained that each step, each turn of the head, carried weight and meaning. Michael felt a deeper awe than any amusement his prank might have brought. After the slideshow ended, the lieutenant switched off the projector and faced Michael. "Do you understand why we have these rules?" he asked. Michael took a breath and nodded. "Yes," he said firmly. "I see now that the guards are symbols of history and respect. Touching them is more than just poking someone. It can be seen as disrespect to that tradition." The lieutenant allowed a small smile. It brightened the room. The officer who had escorted Michael and re-entered and handed a piece of paper to the lieutenant.
Oh.
They spoke quietly before the lieutenant slid the paper across the table. It was the warning and Michael's written apology in both English and the palace's official language. Michael read the words and signed at the bottom with a flourish he hoped was dignified. Felt a sense of relief and humility wash over him. The officers gathered the paper and stepped back. The lieutenant extended his hand. Michael rose and shook it, careful not to grip too firmly. "Thank you for understanding," the lieutenant said. "Enjoy the rest of your visit and remember the value of respect." Michael bowed and replied, "I will. Thank you for teaching me." He turned and saw the guard standing at attention again behind the partition. Michael offered another small nod to the guard, who blinked and returned the gesture. Then the lieutenant gestured toward the door. Michael walked through the door and re-entered the busy palace plaza. The afternoon sun warmed his shoulders as he rejoined the sea of tourists, paused to steady his breathing and shook off the last of his nerves. He glanced toward the guard station. The tall soldier stood perfectly still, hat tall and coat bright. Michael felt a swell of gratitude. He raised a respectful hand and gave a slight bow. The guard did not respond outwardly, but Michael believed he saw a hint of acknowledgement in the soldier's eyes. He turned and found a quiet bench under a leafy tree. He sat and unzipped his camera bag, pulled out his notebook and pen. With a calm heart, he began to write the day's events. First, the prank he had tried, and the shock that followed. Next, the stern but fair questioning. Finally, the lesson. In respect and tradition, he realized the story he would share back home would not be about a funny joke. It would be about learning, humility, and growth. As he wrote, he felt the gentle hum of the palace around him. Children's laughter drifted. From a nearby playground, couples strolled by, hand in hand, admiring the palace walls. A carriage clattered past on shiny wheels. Michael closed his notebook and leaned back, soaking in the scene. He felt a quiet pride in having turned a mistake into a meaningful experience. He imagined telling his friends, "I went to pull a joke, but I came away with respect for history." Stood and slung his camera bag over his shoulder. Took one last look at the guard station, where the soldier continued his watch. Michael offered a final salute, a hand to his heart and a gentle bow. Then he walked away, ready to explore the rest of the palace grounds with new eyes. His steps felt lighter than before. Knew he would carry today's lesson wherever he traveled next. Respect, he realized, was the best souvenir of all. Michael stepped out of the briefing room and into the bright daylight of the palace courtyard. His heart felt heavy, but also a little lighter, as if a great weight had lifted when he apologized. The cool breeze carried the sounds of distant chatter, and the soft clip of horse hooves on cobblestones. For a moment he stood still, letting the sun warm his face. He pictured the guard from earlier, standing tall behind the barrier. He wanted to thank him properly. A palace officer approached and gestured for Michael to follow. Michael walked beside the officer, who led him back through the plaza toward the guard's post. Tourists moved around them, snapping photos and pointing at the palace towers. Michael felt their eyes on him now, curious about the man who had been escorted away. He swallowed a lump in his throat and kept his gaze respectful. When they arrived at the guard post, the tall soldier in red coat and bearskin hat remained at attention. He looked exactly as Michael remembered, unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. Michael took a deep breath and stepped forward. The officer stopped just behind him and bowed slightly, giving Michael space. Michael drew himself up as best he could. He raised his hand in a quiet salute, fingers brushing his forehead. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly. "Sir, I wish to make amends for my disrespect. I hope you will forgive my foolish prank." The soldier's eyes met Michael's. For a moment, Michael thought he saw a flicker of compassion there. The guard did not speak. Instead, he reached up and removed his bearskin hat, letting it rest in his hands. Michael's breath caught. The soldier's face was calm and kind, with gentle lines around his eyes. He gestured toward a small metal stand nearby that held a leather-bound guest book. Michael understood. He stepped forward and opened the book to a fresh page. With careful handwriting, he wrote, "To the brave and patient guard, I am sorry. Today I learned that respect is not a prank. Thank you for your service." He drew a small heart and a simple sketch of the soldier's tall hat beside his words. When he finished, he closed the book and handed the pen back. The guard nodded once, and Michael felt a warmth in his chest. Then the guard placed the bearskin hat back on his head and straightened up. He raised a gloved hand and pointed to Michael's camera bag. Michael unzipped it, heart racing. The guard reached inside and pulled out Michael's favorite lens cap, which Michael had dropped when he was nervous. He held it out to Michael. "Thank you," Michael whispered, reaching for it. He felt gratitude like he had never felt before. The guard gave a single, slight nod and turned back to his post. Michael bowed deeply, then stepped back behind the barrier. He pressed the lens cap to his chest, his fingers trembling around him. Tourists had paused their own activities to watch. Some nodded at him, some smiled encouragingly. He realized that his small act of apology had drawn respect, too. Michael moved away from the barrier and found a low wall to sit on. He put the lens cap in his pocket and closed his eyes for a moment.
Ow.
The courtyard felt alive with history and ceremony. Nearby, children pointed to the changing guard in another section of the plaza. A trumpet fanfare rang out, and soldiers marched in crisp formation. Michael watched in awe. He thought about what had happened. At first he had come seeking laughter and a simple prank. He had forgotten the meaning behind the red coats and bearskin hats. He had treated the guards as living statues, thinking they were there only for show. Now he understood they were part of a long story of duty, of pride, of history. When Michael opened his eyes, he saw the guard from earlier step away from his post. He walked toward a small group of new recruits being trained nearby. Michael watched as the guard spoke softly to one of the recruits, pointing to the drill manual the young soldier carried. The recruit nodded and practiced a salute under the guard's guidance. Michael realized the guard was more than a symbol. He was also a teacher, passing on tradition. Michael felt a surge of respect. He stood and approached the edge of the training area, careful not to interrupt. The guard noticed him and paused, then motioned for Michael to come closer. Hesitated, then approached. The guard pointed to the recruit and then back to Michael, as if inviting him to watch the lesson. Michael nodded gratefully. The guard demonstrated a precise foot movement. Michael saw how every toe pressed and lifted in sync. Then the guard showed a salute, his hand meeting his brow at exactly the right angle.
Ow.
He had imitated that salute in his photos, never realizing the skill behind it. He watched the recruit practice and the guard correct each movement with gentle patience. As the lesson ended, the guard turned to Michael and gave a small thumbs up. Michael returned the gesture with a smile. It was a simple exchange, but to Michael it felt like acceptance. He felt part of something larger community that honored history and took pride in service. Michael walked away from the training area, feeling lighter than he had all day. He passed the guest book once more and saw his message still written there. A few people had signed below, writing "Thank you and we appreciate you." Michael smiled, warmed by their words, strolled toward the palace gardens, eager to reflect on the day. Along the way, he noticed a small information kiosk with a pamphlet rack. One pamphlet showed the history of the guards and the meaning of their uniform colors. Michael picked one up and read, "The red coat symbolized courage, the bearskin hat honored soldiers who stood in battle, and each brass button bore the crest of a past monarch." Michael tucked the pamphlet into his bag. Finding a quiet bench under a flowering cherry tree, Michael sat down and let his thoughts settle. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant hum of tourists created a peaceful backdrop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his travel journal. He wrote another entry. "Today I faced the consequences of a thoughtless joke. I learned that respect and tradition matter. I was given a chance to make amends and even learned from the very guard I pranked. I will carry this lesson wherever I go." A soft voice beside him said, "You have a good heart." Michael looked up and saw the elderly couple from earlier, the ones who had offered him comfort. The woman smiled kindly, and the man nodded. "We saw what you did," the woman continued. "It takes courage to admit a mistake." Michael felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "I'm glad I had the chance to learn." The couple patted his back and walked on, leaving Michael feeling grateful for the kindness of strangers. Michael closed his journal and stowed it safely. He stood and stretched, glancing once more at the palace gates in the distance. He thought of the guard teaching recruits, of the officer's fair handling of his mistake, and of the tourists who witnessed his apology. He felt connected to the place in a way he had never expected. As he walked deeper into the garden, Michael noticed a group of school children on a field trip. They gathered around a guide, learning about royal history. Michael joined them quietly, listening to stories of monarchs and ceremonies. He realized he had become one more listener to this great story, rather than a prankster seeking a laugh. He snapped a few photos of the blossoms and the winding paths. But when he raised his camera to photograph the guard station from a distance, he paused. Instead, he lowered the camera and simply watched. The guard stood tall, staff in hand, watching over the palace. Michael waved and received a faint nod in return. He felt a simple joy in knowing that respect could cross any barrier. Michael left the gardens, walking slowly, savoring each step. He reached the palace exit as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in pink and gold. He paused and took a final look back. In that moment, he felt a deep gratitude for the day's events. He had come seeking a prank, but he was leaving with something much more valuable: understanding, respect, and a memory that would stay with him forever. Michael stepped out of the garden gate and onto the wide cobblestone street. The air was cool now, as evening shadows stretched across the palace walls. He carried his camera bag and his journal, but more than that, he carried a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had learned a lesson he would never forget. As he walked, he thought about how one small moment, one tap on his shoulder, had changed his whole trip. He found a bench beneath an old oak tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Michael sat down and took a deep breath. Sandwich from earlier had long since disappeared, and he felt a gentle hunger. Oh, more than hunger. He felt gratitude. He opened his journal and read the entries he had written: the prank, the stern warning, the lesson in the briefing room, the apology guestbook note, and the training with the guard. Each entry reminded him how close he had come to making a serious mistake and how kindly he had been guided back to respect. A young street musician walked by, carrying a violin case. He paused and looked at Michael with friendly eyes. "Evening," the musician said. "Care for a tune?" Michael nodded and dropped a coin into the open case. The musician smiled and lifted his violin. He began to play a soft melody. One that felt both sad and hopeful. Michael closed his eyes, letting the music pull at his memories of the day. When the piece ended, Michael clapped softly. The musician bowed and moved on. Michael closed his journal and looked around. The palace plaza was quieter now. A few tourists still wandered, taking last photos before dusk. The guards had changed again. New faces stood behind the barrier in their red coats, braving the chill. Michael thought of the young guard he had apologized to, and the lesson he had taught. He wished he could tell that guard how grateful he was. He understood now that respect could bridge any gap, even the barrier between visitor and sentinel. Standing up, Michael headed toward the main gate of the palace grounds. He passed the souvenir kiosk where he had bought a pamphlet. The pamphlet had taught him about uniform colors and crest symbols. He pulled a small enamel pin from his bag, a miniature version of the guard's bearskin hat that he had bought as a keepsake. He pinned it to his jacket over his heart. It felt right, as if a tangible reminder of today's lesson would help him carry respect wherever he went next. Outside the palace fence, the city lights began to glow. Street lamps cast pools of gold on the sidewalks. Michael took out his phone and texted his family back home. "Today, I tried an April Fool's joke on a royal guard. I got a warning and learned to respect tradition. I'm safe and I'm wiser. Love you." Tapped send and slipped the phone back into his pocket. A few steps later, Michael realized he was hungry. He followed the aroma of baked bread and roasting meat to a small food stall. He ordered a warm pastry filled with cheese and herbs and a cup of hot tea. He paused at a nearby stand of flowers and bought a single red rose to carry with him. Thought of giving the rose to someone who had shown him kindness, the elderly couple, perhaps, or the street musician. He decided he would find the couple again, if he could. Sitting at a small round table, Michael unwrapped his pastry and took a bite. The cheese was creamy and just salty enough. He drank his tea slowly, watching as people passed by, laughing, chatting, taking photos. He felt at peace. The city around him thrummed with life, but inside him was a calm certainty that he would carry the memory of this day always. He opened his journal once more and wrote a final note for part 5. Leave the palace not with a story of laughter, but with a story of respect. I came for a funny prank and found a lesson in history. I will remember the faces of those guards not as props for my photos, but as real people with duty and pride. I will tell this story to friends and promise to honor every tradition I encounter. Next. He underlined the word honor twice and closed the book. Finishing his tea, Michael rose and tucked his journal into his bag. I wrapped the red rose in a small piece of paper and headed back toward the plaza. The palace gates were lit with soft floodlights. The guards still stood at attention, tall bearskin hats silhouetted against the night sky. Michael approached the barrier, rose in hand. I thought of the guard he had met, the one who taught him respect. He raised his hand in a salute, and for a moment the guard seemed to nod. Michael stepped away from the barrier and called softly, "Thank you." His voice was gentle, almost a whisper, but it felt powerful to him. He turned and walked away, keeping his eyes on the ground for a few steps before lifting his gaze to the palace towers, bathed in golden light. He gave one more bow of his head, then set off down the street toward the tube station. On the ride back to his hotel, Michael leaned his head against the window and watched the city blur by. Lights and shadows danced across his reflection in the glass. He thought of plans for the next day, maybe a visit to the museum or a stroll through a park he had read about. But mostly, he thought of respect. How it begins with listening, with apology, with learning. He felt proud that he had turned a mistake into growth. When he reached his stop, Michael stepped onto the platform and spotted the elderly couple from earlier, waiting for the same train. He waved, and they beckoned him over. He handed the woman the red rose. She smiled and smelled its petals. The man nodded and said, "You learned well today." Michael nodded and said, "I did. Thank you for your kindness." The train arrived, and they boarded together. Michael chose a seat by the window, the couple across from him. He held the rose carefully in his lap as the train rattled through tunnels. Michael opened his journal to a fresh page and began to sketch the palace gate and a lone guard standing tall. He wrote beneath it, a symbol of duty, a lesson in respect. He closed the journal and leaned back. The rose on his lap felt soft and alive. He smelled its scent and smiled. That night, in his hotel room, Michael unpacked his journal and set it on the desk. He then opened his laptop and began to write an email to his friends, describing what had happened. He wrote about his initial plan for a prank, the guard's stern reaction, the palace briefing, the apology note, and the guard's teaching with the recruit. He wrote about the moment he received his lens cap back and how that small act felt like acceptance. He told them how he had turned a joke into a lesson and how he would always carry that lesson with him. Then he attached a photo of the palace at dusk and the pin of the bearskin hat on his jacket. When he finished, Michael sat back and reread his email. He felt a warm glow in his chest, a mix of humility and pride. He clicked send. Then he shut down his laptop, turned off the lamp, and slipped under the covers. The rose rested on the bedside table, its petals catching the soft lamplight as he drifted to sleep. Michael pictured the palace guards at their posts, the quiet strength in their presence, and the way their tradition would continue long after he had gone. He thought of the many travelers who would visit and maybe never think twice about protocol. He hoped his story might remind someone else to pause, to think, to respect. In his dreams, he saw the guard's face smiling kindly as if to say, "Well done." And in that peaceful moment, Michael understood fully that some jokes are not worth the risk, but every lesson learned in kindness and respect is a treasure to keep.